Now I'm going to show you layering using the masking function and creating a number of different layers in this little landscape here. This is very similar to what we did in Premiere, but the way you go about it is quite a lot different in DaVinci. Okay, first of all, I want to put my background onto the timeline. And I've got a few different backgrounds here we can choose from. But I want to start with this one. And we're going to put a little small lake right in there. So you drag this onto the timeline. And you can, I don't want them to be very long, but we can stretch this out a little bit. And we're going to superimpose a small pond on top of there. So we go here into water clips, but I think we'll pick this one right here. There you go. We don't need it too long. So we'll just drag it on top. And it's about the right length here. Now, when you work with masking, you go into the Fusion window because that's where you work with special effects. And so you want to highlight the clip that you're going to use. And you click on this little button here that's called Fusion. And you get this window that comes up. And here, you got to know this button here. If you want to look at the clips on the timeline, you press clips. And then you can highlight which one that you want to work on. And so, right here is your actual clip. And this is the media in, and this is the media out. And this is the one that we work with here. And we're going to work with the masking tools. And you have several different types of masking tools here. You have the rectangle, you have the ellipse, you have the polygon, and the B-spline. And we're going to work with the polygon for the first few of them. And what you do is you just simply, you drag it onto the timeline. And the way you connect it to the media is just simply to, you've got this line here, and you connect it like that. And once it's connected, the entire thing is going to be transparent, and that's not quite what you want, so you invert it. So then you go back into the timeline. Now, this is one of the things that's a little bit difficult with DaVinci, as you have to jump back and forth to these windows. So what you need to do is first size this using the zoom tool here. And then using the position tools, you put it roughly into place. There you go. And you can make it a little bit bigger if you like, because we're going to crop some of that out. Now you can go back into Fusion. And it will always give you kind of the full size of the image. It doesn't shrink it while you're working in Fusion. So now you've got the polygon tool, and you can start actually just kind of creating a random shape. And now you need to invert it again so you can see what it would look like. And again, you don't actually see what's underneath it. That's one of the problems, but you can see what's underneath it when you go to the timeline. And again, you click on that when you want to highlight it. And then you can start actually softening it up a little bit by putting in more points on the polygon. And one thing you definitely want to do is to soften the edge a little bit using the softening tab. And when you go back to the timeline, you can kind of see what it looks like. Now, if you want, you can make the entire pond itself smaller or bigger. Or you can go back into the mask and you can actually make the mask bigger or smaller. So that way you could work with more or less waves. So you could zoom in and then you get just right into the center a little bit. We can see what that looks like. And then you could still make this larger. So you get quite large waves going through there. Or you could go back into here, click on the node. This is called a node, and make that bigger using the scale tab or the size tab, and go back into the timeline and make the entire image smaller like that. Okay, So remember, this is the media and these are the nodes that you make. A node is something you can apply. Now, you can unhook it like this, and if you go back into the timeline, it has gotten rid of the actual mask. But when you go back into Fusion, you just reconnect the node with the media and it will reestablish itself. And that way you can get a little bit of an idea of whether that's what you want. Now we're going to shrink this timeline a little bit, and then we're going to work with another image, and this time we're going to work the masking differently. So we want to put a little bit of ocean into here. So we drag this onto the timeline, and you actually lift it up a little bit, and then we'll get another piece of water and put that. We don't want too much of it, just a bit. So we'll do the mark in, mark out, and you drag it in underneath, and then you can, if you want, you can stretch it out to fit. So in this case, you actually reverse the masking. And you can jump to any one of these if you want to work on that particular mask. So in this one, we'll work with the polygon again. This is your node. And you drag it in there to attach it. And once again, it disappears because the entire thing will be transparent. So you need to invert it. And now you draw on the overlay here. And you see that's disappeared, and we just give it a bit of a soft edge. And now you go back to the timeline just to see what it looks like. And then you realize that it's appeared to have shrunk, but what the timeline does is it adjusts itself to the size of the larger of the images. So then you realize that this thing, you can click on this and just make it larger. And then at the same time, you can take this underlying bit of water and shrink that to fit, depending on what size of waves that you want. And at the end of everything, you can always crop this off. So then we shrink the underlying piece of water into what you think is the right scale. And then you can move this up and down into place. And you see that water. And you can, again, you can adjust it even more if you like, or you can move it up and down, or you can make the scale even smaller, however you like. Okay, let's go on to another couple of images here, and we'll work this again a little bit differently. Okay, next, we want to go with this pool here. And we're going to drop this onto the timeline. And it just says that it's not connected, but in fact it is. You can see that in here. I'll take a different clip, water clip, and maybe you want a few waves. And again, you drag that underneath, and so we've cut it roughly the right size. And it seems to fit the size of that pool fairly well. Now, we go back into Fusion. And once more, we want to work with the polygon. And we're going to do it rather roughly. You can do it with a lot more refinement if you like. Same thing again, you have to invert it. And you can see that you probably need to fix that a little bit, and then soften the edges not too much. So we'll see what that looks like. Doesn't look too bad. But you see the water there behind that's just a little bit too large. So you shrink that to fit with the zoom tool, and then with the position adjusters you adjust that. Now I'm going to show you one other thing you can do here when you're working in the node system in Fusion. So we click on that, and if you want to, you can actually bring things like color adjustment in there. And So you could adjust a little bit the background if you like, and just to suit the color of the water. And you could even work a little bit on the hue of the background, the saturation if you like. And that way you actually can match up a little bit more the background or the water inside. So now let's try a few other options with the masking tools, and we're now going to work with the different image with the eye, and we'll put that on the timeline, and we want things below it, so we put it up one, and one of the water clips, we try this one. We'll stretch it out, and you click on it and you drag the cursor onto it, and then you go again into Fusion. You can see all your little clips down here. And so now we're going to work with a different kind of mask. We're going to work with the ellipse. Move that a little bit out of there. And now we need to change the size of the ellipse itself. So we click on it, and then we go into, you can soften it if you like, but first you can move it around a little bit. You can center it right on the pupil there. And then you work on the height and the width of it using the scale tab or the size tab. And then you soften the edge. And of course now you want to invert it so you have it right in the middle of the eye. And you can actually move it around a little bit, and then you can make the border width larger or smaller. And again, you can soften the edge. Now we go on to the timeline, and you see that suddenly this is smaller again because you've masked it, and so you need to adjust the size of the actual image itself, and the mask will adjust with it. So now you have this kind of nice bit of water as the pupil. Now one thing we could do, we'll raise these both up, and now we're going to actually put 2 layers of water in here, and you can make a pupil for the second layer. So we'll get another piece of water, something a lot different, and drag that underneath. And then now we're going to put a mask on this layer. So you go back into Fusion, and it tends to actually default to the upper layer, so you need to click on the other one here and put a mask into there. And we're going to go with an ellipse again, and then you need to make it a little bit smaller. You got to do a little bit of guessing, and then you can adjust the size also in the timeline. So we go back to the timeline here, and we can see that it's a little bit off center. So now you can actually just move it with the positioning. You need to go click onto the actual clip itself, and now you can move that into place. And so you have a pupil that's from the other set of water, and now you can make that bigger or smaller so it actually fits. If you'd like to change the relative darknesses and lightnesses of these, you can do that going into color. And it doesn't really matter which one you click on. We'll take that one because that's one that we actually want to change. So you go into color, and you'll see there you've got all of your clips, and you want to work on this one because this is actually the pupil. So you could go into gain, and you could make it lighter or darker. And you could also do the same thing with lift, which works on the lower end of it. So I'll adjust that to fairly dark, and then you can click on the iris around it, and you could perhaps brighten that. So now we can go back to the timeline and see what it looks like. And there you can see that the pupil is darker and the iris is a little bit lighter. And if you want to go into that particular mask, just to soften it very, very slightly, you could. And you'll see it's just a little bit softer. Now we've got one last thing we're going to do where we're also going to put a couple of layers on it, but for a completely different reason, and I'll show you how to do a moving mask. So we'll move this along and we'll get this landscape because we want to build a puddle into here. Or no, that one goes up a little bit higher. And then we'll get the correct water here, and we want something with a little bit of a fine grain. That's a little bit of a finer grain there. We'll put that water underneath, make it the right size, and then we click on there again, go into Fusion. I'll do this one just rather quickly. Again, we want the polygon and invert. Maybe whip that a little bit better into shape. And you see now again we have to enlarge in this. So we click on the photograph, zoom in slightly, and then once more shrink that to size. And using the position tabs, you put it in place. A little bit of fine tuning here just to get that water as fine as we can. There we go. And again, once more, we're going to want to soften this and perhaps adjust a few of those a little bit. Okay. There we go. We have our water there. We're going to move this to the bottom because we want to do one other thing. We're going to want to put a kayaker in there. And we're going to have this kayaker kind of paddling across a little bit. So we'll put that underneath, and you could actually just have it like this, where the kayaker is just right in there, but I want to just have the kayaker on top of the other water. Now this one, of course, the middle one, we shrink a little bit so it fits. Put it into place, because I want to eliminate those weeds and things like that there. So we'll go back to the beginning, and this kayaker is going to kind of start right in the middle. It doesn't really matter that much. If you want, we could move it over to some degree and then crop that off. But I'm just going to have it start, more or less. It's going to fade in. Okay. Now this is how you'd make the mask actually move. So again, you have to click on the particular clip that you want, and once more the polygon, and you invert it just so you can see what you're doing, and you put your mask around it. And once more you have to invert it or uninvert it. Soften the edges here. You really want to soften the edges because you want this to blend in with the other water. Now at this point, you know, the kayak will disappear in little points here and there. And then in terms of the center of it, you want to put keyframes, and also in the size in case you want to change the size as it goes along. Now you can press play, let it move a little bit forward, and then just adjust using the center tabs, the XY coordinates, and you just let it play, and then here and there you just adjust it so it fits. And this will automatically put keyframes in there, and you'll see here there's a little timeline where it moves the actual mask itself along. And you can go back in and adjust this. And you're near the end of it. So you could go back to here and move this timeline along, and you could see it will just disappear at some point, and you could later put transitions in there to make it appear to fade in and fade out. So there you get your kayaker moving across pretty nicely. And you could move the entire clip over just a little bit if you like. Because now that you have the mask in there, you see it's not going to show up behind here. And you could even, if you like, you could make it move a little bit faster. We'll zoom in on this. We'll start at the beginning. And just in terms of positioning, you could just, on transform, you could put keyframes in. And as you move along, you could actually move the entire image over a little bit. There you go. So it'll appear to actually move along a little bit faster. There you go. Now we're going to put one more kayaker in there, doing something a little bit different. And this is how you can play a little bit with the scale. So if you want, we can stretch these out. Now this entire thing needs to shrink and then move more to the center and even a little bit smaller. There we go. Now we're going to put a mask on here also. So we go back into Fusion and we're going to need to go to this one and make sure that the cursor is right at the beginning there. You got to make sure that one's highlighted. Polygon mask, connect it. Once more you invert and then you draw. There you go. And once more you need to invert it or uninvert it. And make sure you click keyframes into here. And the size could be a little bit bigger and just the center up a little bit higher using the tabs. Not too much because you don't want any of that background into there. Now you need to soften it so it fits in well. And then you let it move ahead a little bit. And at some point you realize you need to move the mask and make it a little bit bigger. A little bit bigger, shift it over. You shift it down a bit, and then so it encompasses that. So it's really tricky trying to get this one. And now you need to shift the entire mask over a little bit so it fits that, and a little bit lower. And then you see this boat will shift a little bit, so now you have to shift that mask a little bit again and make it slightly larger. And to advance it forward, I'm just hitting the space bar. Okay, that should be at the end of it. Now we can go back to the timeline and see what happened here. And you realize it's kind of bumping into there. So what you need to do is just shrink the entire thing a little bit. There you go. And the water's a little bit bright. You want this perhaps, you can make a little bit more transparent, either with opacity, or again, you could go into color and just drop the gain down a little bit. That clip, you can just knock the gain down, make it a little bit darker. You can bring the lower end up and bring that's with the lift, and the gain would be the top end, and you just lower that somewhat. And then you can see it adjusts it a little bit better. And go back into the timeline. Maybe you don't need the opacity so much. There we go. So now you can kind of look at these two things here. And one thing you probably want to do is a little bit of blend in at the beginning. So your toolbox, your video transitions, your cross dissolve, and you can pop it onto there. Shrink it though. You can do another cross dissolve on here. Now you can see the entire thing. So these are all the different things you can do with the masking tool. And we can export the entire thing and you can watch it now. So the last thing we need to do now is just to export this. So again, at the end of it, you press O. So you have your out point. Then you press your rocket ship for exporting it. You can zoom in a bit, but you don't really need to. And then you click H.264. You can call it masked water. In QuickTime, you go to MP4, and then you add to render queue, and then start render. There you go.